Where? Welcome all. We'll get started in just a moment. All right. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. A lot of people on this call today. I will give us just a few more seconds since it starts at 6 officially.
Hopefully all the students show up. I appreciate y'all letting me be a part of this because, you know, a lot of them were scrambling day. Where do I go? How do I sign up? What do I do?
Oh, wow. Well, they got probably 2 reminders from me. So,
oh, that's good. Now, if you can, I'll hire you. You can remind them to do their assignments, and then
no, I'm out of the business of chasing around students.
Oh no, come on.
Been there, done that. All right, we have Ashley with us as well. Okay, yay, wonderful. All right, well then let's just get started. Welcome to the Building Better Futures, a discussion on the detrimental effects of a criminal conviction. I'm Evita Fox-Kreider with Oklahomans for Criminal Justice Reform, and I will be your moderator this evening. We're really excited to have each of you here tonight to engage with us in this very important discussion. Our focus this evening is going to be on the very dire need for reform within our criminal legal system in order to redress the lack of justice within it, right? In particular, we're going to talk about fines and fees reform, expungement reform, and probation reform, and we'll go in that order, actually. So I want to get on with our program and introduce our viewing audience to our very impressive panel of experts here to talk with us. But before I do, I'd just like to acknowledge the tremendous breakthrough we have had today. So if you haven't heard, earlier today, Governor Stitt chose to issue an executive order granting clemency to Julius Jones. Yet despite the recommendation of his own pardon and parole board, he has commuted the sentence to life without the possibility of parole. While we are so very grateful that Julius's life will be spared, we're still a bit disappointed that Julius's family will not be able to hug him again and that justice will not be fully served. So we continue to stand in solidarity with the Jones family and with Julius in whatever way their journey will look like moving towards justice. But today we're going to celebrate saving Julius's life through the power of the people. And I say that is a testimony to what can happen when people band together in action for change. All right, so now I want to specifically highlight and thank the wonderful students and faculty of Langston University, some of whom I've had the pleasure of meeting this week, and the National Association of Blacks in Criminal Justice student chapters for co-hosting this event with OCJR. Kelly and Reggie, would you like to introduce yourselves and share just a sentence or two as to why it was important to you all to hold this discussion?
Well,
Sure, I'll go ahead. You want me to start it off, Reggie?
I can go ahead. I have another.
Okay, go ahead, Reggie.
Yes. First of all, my name is Reginald Hines. I'm the state president of the National Association of Blacks in Criminal Justice. And I'd like to thank Ms. Kreider for approaching us about being a part of this webinar. One of the things is we look at reentry and things like that. These 3 topics are very important to reentry. And during my former life, I had the opportunity to be over probation and parole. And so I'm quite aware of how fines and fees affect people that are incarcerated or once they get out, and especially those that are on probation, and them trying to change their lives, and they're hit with all of these fees. So this to me is a very timely topic, and I really appreciate you all putting this together, and thank you again, Ms. Kreider, for the work that you all are doing, and also for allowing us to be a part of this. Thank you.
Absolutely, thank you, Reggie.
Hi, my name is Kelly O'Brien. I'm the chair and advisor and faculty member for the Department of Social Sciences and Humanities at Langston University. And I too want to express the same sentiments as Reggie to Evita for, coming out to class this week and kind of, getting students interested. I think I've almost got her recruited to be an adjunct at the university. So, just a little bit more pressure and I'll get her there. But I have to agree, one of the things that I pride myself in, not only being as a teacher, but also being a mentor and advisor to the students that are on here tonight, is, giving them voice. And, and I tell my students all the time, it just takes one person to change things and to make a statement and to get people to realize, how things need to change from, the past to now and to the future. And so I'm hoping, and one of the reasons why I wanted to be a part of this and have my students be a part of this is because they're in school right now, but they are our future. They're going to be our social change makers out there, going forward as they get their degrees and go beyond Langston. And so this isn't only an opportunity for them to hear some of the key issues that they may not be aware of, or if they are aware of, they don't know the detriment effects of those things. And then, of course, going forward, they'll be able to take this into their future careers and take what they learned here tonight and learn through their education and experience and really make the kind of change that needs to be out there. So I appreciate you all letting us be a part of this, allowing my students to be here to ask the questions and provide them with the insight from a different perspective than a textbook or, seeing and hearing me every day. So I really appreciate this opportunity.
Thank you so much. It's an honor for us as OCJR to partner with you all in putting on this forum. I am now going to go and introduce our panelists, and I'll go in the order of my screen. So our first panelist is Tiana Mays. Tiana is the Associate Director for the Criminal Justice Project at the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law. Prior to joining the Lawyers Committee, Tiana was the Managing Attorney at the Maryland Coalition Against Sexual Assault Legal Institute. She has numerous and significant litigation experience from working as a public defender in Maryland, Massachusetts, and New Jersey, where she successfully challenged the state's application of the American with Disabilities Act that resulted in a published New Jersey appellate court decision. Next, we have David Gately. David works for the Oklahoma Public Policy Institute as the Criminal Justice Policy Analyst. He earned his Juris Doctorate from OU College of Law, where he wrote on topics such as the abolition of cash bail and the effectiveness of restorative justice. Most recently, he worked as a licensed legal intern in the Tulsa County District Attorney's Office. Our third panelist is Ed Wunsch. Ed has had the privilege of helping individuals who are turning their lives around after exiting the justice system. He's assisted clients with a variety of family, consumer, and housing law issues. Additionally, he has assisted with expungements and criminal justice debt issues, such as fines and fees assessed by courts against criminal defendants. Ed currently works as a dedicated criminal justice debt attorney at Legal Aid Services of Oklahoma. And then next on my screen, and we don't have, we're still waiting on one more person, but next on my screen is Sarah Brune Edwards. Sarah is an attorney and counsel with Hartsock Conger Kaysen. She currently serves on the board of directors for Oklahomans for Criminal Justice Reform, Oklahoma Justice Action, and Citizens for Children's and Families. She's a former attorney and director with Crowe and Dunleavy, former deputy general counsel for the Office of Governor Brad Henry, and former attorney for the Oklahoma House of Representatives. Sarah is active in Oklahoma County child welfare initiatives, as well as criminal legal reform. She's helped pass State Question 780, 781, and was president for the State Question 805. And then we have another panelist who I may have to promote, and that is Demita Price. Demita is a community leader, a criminal justice reform advocate with lived experience, as well as an intern with our organization, OCJR. Through her advocacy, she's helped the Oklahoma community, as well as legislators, understand the inequities of fines and fees and the inhumanity within our criminal legal system. So welcome, everyone. I am now going to give you a quick note. Okay, so first of all, we're so eager to talk to y'all, but just the order of the evening, we're going to start with a brief overview of the issues from David from the Oklahoma Policy Institute, and then we're going to launch into our panel discussion. And we encourage our Langston students to please ask questions. If you do have a question throughout the evening, you can put it into the chat. Ashley from our team will be monitoring the chat, and we will get to as many questions as we can. So let's get started. David, I'm going to turn it over to you to give us a brief overview. And you can share your screen, I believe.
Okay, thanks so much. Let me get this shared here. Can you all see this okay? Okay. So yeah, thanks so much. Again, my name is David Gately. I'm the Criminal Justice Policy Analyst for Oklahoma Policy Institute. I again want to thank OCJR, NABCJ, Langston University for having this event and inviting me to be a part of it. I also want to note again to the events of the past few days in the state of Oklahoma, and just really acknowledge that there's still so much work left to be done. But through collective action, coming together, we can really change things in the criminal justice area for the better. So these kind of conversations are part of that. So let's just start here. So I want to first start with a quick agenda. like Kavita said, I'm going to just do a quick overview of the issues before we jump into that or into the panel discussion. But I want to start with mentioning that the big piece, I think, throughout our panel discussion, through this presentation, is that Oklahoma really has created a bad model of incentives in our criminal justice system. And this is particularly apparent in the overwhelming burdens on individuals and families that become virtually impossible to handle. So the 3 points, as mentioned, I'm going to quickly talk over tonight on the detrimental effects, criminal convictions, is really the burden of fines and fees, the effects of a felony record and how expungement can help with that. But also, where can we go next when it comes to reform? And then just the conditions of supervision in this state. It's also incredibly important to point out from the start, too, that when we talk about these burdens, they're not accidental. They're not bugs of the system. They're actual intended features that create economic, social, political repercussions for the communities that are targeted. And also, they've been built and implemented over the course of decades in Oklahoma, and it's going to take some time to dismantle that. So I just want to start with that framing. So let's begin with the basic question of how are criminal courts funded in the state of Oklahoma? How does that funding hurt families? And also the vital systems that we rely on for the idea of justice. So, and again, a lot of this will be covered in the panel discussion, so it's going to be a brief overview. But in fiscal year 16, for example, on average in Oklahoma, about 5% of criminal court funding came from taxes. The rest, or 95%, came from revenue from civil and criminal court fines and fees. So I want to be clear, when we're talking about these courts, this is where we charge individuals with a crime. It's where we have trials, although probably not often enough. And also where we expect to promote the idea of public safety and justice. But the funding reality is that we're basically taxing the poorest individuals in our communities. And then we're expecting that same idea of safety and justice. The best metaphor, and one used often by my colleague, Damian Shade, many of you may know, is that we use a Netflix model of funding, or really a fee-for-service model. So I also want to be clear that from the beginning that law enforcement, elected officials across the partisan spectrum understand that the system of fines and fees we have now is wrong and it's not working. So here's a quote from one of the largest county DAs, Tulsa County DA Steve Kunzweiler, said that the idea that a DA has to be collecting fees on the backs of the people they're prosecuting is simply immoral. So why is it immoral and what can we do about it? So let's look at those harms and the method of that harm a bit. But I want to note that, again, the panel will be speaking more specifically on the harms, particularly in the face of families due to these fines and fees. But I just wanted to start by talking about the big picture first. What does it do to our systems of justice broadly? What does this funding method do? So first, when we think about this, police officers in our community become debt collectors for the courts. They scour our communities. They're trying to collect that outstanding debt. One estimation I saw, I think it was from 2012 to 2018, that outstanding debt was in upwards of $600 million or more. So if they're serving warrants, police officers are serving warrants on failure to pay, arresting people on failure to pay, they aren't responding to 911 calls. They're not engaged in solving what a lot of people would consider to be the worst incidences of violence in our community. Further, we know through the study of this topic that in some counties it costs, for every dollar we collect, it costs more than $1 to make that collection. So for example, in some counties it costs $1.17 for every dollar collected in criminal fines and fees. So what does this mean? It means our courts are perpetually underfunded. And the resources that are meant to steer people away from those lengthy prison sentences, like mental health court, drug court, are impossible funding situations. But think about that piece: drug courts, primarily funded through fines and fees, mental health court, funded through fines and fees. So when you fund these that way and through this method, you're creating additional harms. And it also tells those engaged in the process they're not even worth fully funding. They're not worth allocating tax dollars for. Also, it does not allow for the proper resources that can actually truly help better the lives of Oklahomans. And the last and most important piece I want to make about fines and fees is the racial disparities in criminal fines and fees that attaches itself to the process. So Open Justice and Oklahoma Policy Institute, where I work, created a data analysis. And I encourage you to look at this sometime on the website, where you can look at a map of Tulsa County and Oklahoma County. The Tulsa County's here on the screen, where you can literally see a heat map of the highest population density of people of color and how they have the highest concentration of per capita court debt. And that's by an order of magnitude. These communities also have the highest proliferation of failure to pay warrants, for example. So think about what this does to communities that already have a justifiably low trust in law enforcement. When you have thousands of failure to pay warrants issued in your community, and you see law enforcement arresting the poorest people in your community on a daily basis, it reduces any trust or desire to call 911 in emergencies, for example, or to interact with the criminal justice system at all, maybe as a witness or as a victim. And further, when we have police as debt collectors, it's not only wasting the valuable law enforcement resources that I mentioned, or contributing to Oklahoma's expensive incarceration crisis that we have been dealing with, but it also does worsen the racial disparities in policing. You can look at this slide here that some predominantly Black, low-income Tulsa neighborhoods reported police stops more than 100 times that of wealthy, predominantly white neighborhoods. So what's some solutions I wanted to quickly go over? And again, we'll talk more about these in the panel discussion, I assume, but these are some of the solutions. And again, I don't want to spend a lot of time because we'll have a robust discussion about this, but here you can see we should adequately fund courts and court services, not off the backs of the poorest, not off the backs of a fee-for-service or Netflix model, but adequately fund it and all the services that come with it. We should allow judges to waive fines and fees. Some counties do this, some judges do this, but it should be across the board. We should empower judges to waive those fines and fees. We should end arrests and incarceration for failure to pay. We do that in Oklahoma. We lock people up because they're poor, they can't pay. And then also, and I want to note, juvenile fines and fees. We put juvenile fines and fees on children in the state of Oklahoma. With no ability to pay, they have serious repercussions for adulthood going forward. So we should really repeal youth fines and fees. The last estimate I saw was that it would only cost about $500,000. So $500,000, and we could totally wipe out juvenile fines and fees in the state. We should get this done in Oklahoma. We should get it done this session. So really quickly on the other points, and again, a lot of this will be covered in the panel discussion. I don't want to spend a lot of time on, but automatic expungement. This truly can better the lives of Oklahomans. I just wanted to give you a quick picture of how difficult the process for expungement is now in a graphic format. You can see here, it's costly, it's time consuming. You need an attorney. And you can also see where those fines and fees rear their head. Again, you have to pay off that court debt before being eligible for expungement, I assume in the vast majority of cases. So I just wanted to show you that before we dive into that. I also want to show you a picture of our community members waiting in line to access a free expungement fair in Oklahoma this last year. And this just really shows that when given the opportunity, people know the burden of having a felony record and how clearing that record will truly better their lives. We know the need is there, and they shouldn't have to line up for hours to access something that they're legally entitled to. So more on expungement here in a bit. The last piece I want to make before we dive into it is the burden of being on supervision or serving your sentence in the community. I'll only touch on this briefly, like I said, but and what we should do about it. But we need to really rethink and reimagine what it means to be on supervision in the state of Oklahoma. We should adopt a system similar to like in Utah, which is built on rewards and incentives for compliance that works with individuals to become successful while on that supervision and avoid incarceration and lengthy jail sentences or lengthy incarceration, lengthy jail. These are issues that have bipartisan support in the state of Oklahoma and can really lead to better outcomes. So some of those are we should adopt a supervision system, like I said, built on incentives. We should end arrest and incarceration for simple technical violations, like failing a drug test while on supervision. And then we should allow for earned credits to reduce that time on supervision while they're compliant. And then again, we should fund actual proper resources for rehabilitation. So thanks again for letting me give a brief overview on that. I'm excited about the panel discussion and hearing from this great panel. So thanks so much. I'm going to end sharing my screen here.
Thank you, David, for that overview. I'm going to address our first question to Tiana. So we heard David talk about the failure to pay warrants. Is there another alternative if people are unable to pay their fines and fees? And is it constitutional for people to go to jail because they can't afford to pay them?
Thank you for the question. And also thank you all for having me as a panelist. And so to address the first part of the question, yes, there are alternatives to warrants for fines and fees. There are also alternatives for actually assessing the fines and fees. Part of the problem of the fines and fees system in Oklahoma has to go back to the early 1990s. And part of the issue has to do with the tax structure there. And, when you put things in place where you don't raise taxes, and the problem is you then can't adequately fund your courts. And then the courts are then required to try and fund themselves. And the way that that's happening and the way that it seems like Oklahoma has decided is a solution is to create a fee for everything. And so when it comes to fines and fees, you should be allowed to ask for something called a payment plan. You should be allowed to go back into the court and say, hey, wait a minute, the fee that I was assessed, the fine that was assessed to me, the amount I owe, I cannot pay that. And as a result, I should have something, and I'm required to have something called an ability to pay determination hearing. What that basically means is that the court has the duty to inquire into whether or not you make a meaningful inquiry into whether or not you can afford to pay your fines and fees. And when they're making that inquiry, they should be looking at your bills, they should look at all your debts, and they should listen to what the people are saying right in front of them about what they can actually pay. And when you have that, what we've seen is in systems where you have people actually setting their own amounts that they can pay. I can pay $50 a month. I can pay $40 a month. What you see is you actually see a much higher compliance rate, and you actually see much less money spent on warrants and spent on collection, and less money spent on jailing people. And you see more people able to actually still contribute with their families and to their jobs, while at the same time being able to pay some of those fines and fees back. And so I think that the warrants, the problem with the warrants, it goes to what David said in his overview that talks about just how much money the state is spending, and some of these counties and cities are spending to actually try and collect the fines and fees. And when you actually look at the amount that's outstanding and the amount that actually goes into collecting them, you actually see that that's actually a really bad model, and it doesn't work. And so there are alternatives to that. And as for jailing people, sometimes it can get a little tricky, because courts will say, well, we're not jailing you because you can't afford to pay. We're jailing you because you're in contempt of a court order, and contempt of that court order is to pay this fee. And, the thing is, when you peel back the layers, you actually see, no, they actually are being jailed because they can't afford to pay. And there's a court case that came out in the 80s, Bearden versus Georgia. And Bearden talks about the fact that you can't have these things called debtors' prisons. And so what a debtors' prison is basically like you go to jail because you're poor, you're too poor to pay. And as a result, you go to jail. And, we have those protections from that case, but also Oklahoma has its own rules. Oklahoma went even further. And Oklahoma says every time before you go to jail, before that judge is supposed to send you to jail, you're supposed to have that ability to pay determination hearing I just spoke of. And what we see is we don't see that happening. So yes, you do have a right to have those hearings. It's not constitutional, and it's not right to just send people to jail merely because they can't pay and can't afford these fines and fees that are pretty astronomical to begin with.
Thank you. Ed, I see you shaking your head. Do you have something you want to add?
I just want to echo everything that Tiana said. So my role at Legal Aid is this position came about where I'm going about and doing ability to pay hearings for our individual clients since about 2019. Why are we doing this? Because no one else was. In general, in 2 of the counties, Tulsa County and Oklahoma County, you get a public defender through the county's office. But in 75 of the counties, you get OIDs, which is basically private contract attorneys that get paid per case. And you can bet as soon as you plea or you're found guilty, they're out of the case. They don't care about the fines and fees. And so I find myself going around the state up to a little over 27, I think 27 or 28 district courts, as well as some more municipal courts, doing the ability to pay hearings, where an ability to pay hearing is a way to say, yes, judge, I haven't paid, but here's why. Here's how much money I'm making. $50 a month sounds like a reasonable payment plan to you because you're a judge, you can do that. But for my clients, that can be really troublesome sometimes. Sometimes $25 is the right amount, sometimes $10, and sometimes nothing is the right amount because that's just their situation. I'm going to surprise Evita a little bit here, but I gave a presentation to some judges here, and I'm going to try to share my screen because I think that this puts a fine point on it. And this, I've convinced a few judges with this. So hopefully, is that coming through for everyone here?
Yep.
Okay, so imagine this. Imagine that the judge says, okay, great, you're making $9.90 an hour and you're working 40 hours a week. Well, I'm going to give you 92 days in jail because I think that that's what the appropriate amount is. Oh, but you're making $20 an hour. I'm going to give you 3 days in jail. That seems wrong, right? Like you shouldn't spend more time in jail because you're making less money. And now if it'll let me go to the next page, well, that's what we're doing with fines and fees. Okay, if you're making $9.90 an hour and we give you a $50 a month payment plan and you have, this is your budget, just numbers right here, that $50 a month payment plan making $9.90 an hour, that is 92% of your disposable income. Okay, so we are saying, guess what? You've committed that you have this speeding ticket and you have to pay $50 a month for it. We want 90% of your money. But, oh, hey, you're making more money? Well, we only want 3% of your money. We'll give you the same $50 a month payment. When you don't do ability to pay hearings, this is what you get. And so the challenge that we've got is because there aren't advocates, because courts aren't aware of this, you wind up with that same disproportionate payment where we said it was wrong to put 92 days in jail for someone on a given crime versus 3% based on the amount of money. Well, we're punishing people different based on their income. That's happening today. If instead you were to go ahead and try to even that out, if you're trying to say that maybe 10% of your disposable income is the right amount for someone to pay, well then, hey, for that person making $9.90 an hour, 10% of their disposable income is a $5 a month payment plan. And that's before you tackle the kind of top dollar line, why should someone have to pay off over a long period of time? But this is one of the reasons why the Rule 8 hearings, the ability to pay hearings matter. And it's just a shame that we've got this great rule that's just not being utilized.
Yeah, it's really perverse. Go ahead, Sarah.
Hey, Evita, Ed, you or David probably know this, but I think our number is that the average person comes out with around $25,000 in fines and fees per case, right? And then if it's like a trafficking case, I think the minimum is around 100,000, which, I mean, if you think about that at $9, $10 an hour, it's impossible. And also, it's my understanding that a lot of revocations occur because of non-payment of fines and fees, which puts people just right back in and drives up greater costs.
Yeah, I would agree that the revocations happen, and I'm always ashamed to see that. Like when I come in after the fact, where someone has been revoked, and then I'm arguing their fines and fees still because they owe more money after they get revoked. As Tiana was mentioning, Bearden v. Georgia says that shouldn't happen, and it's very disheartening to see that, again, with the perverse incentives we have with the self-funding, with the contract attorneys as public defenders in counties across the state. I see people that are revoked based purely on non-payment, where Bearden says they shouldn't have, but they get revoked because they didn't pay, and no one ever makes an argument that they shouldn't be revoked over that.
And just briefly before we move to the next question, I also just want to highlight, that the United States is the #1 incarcerator of people in the world. And for a long time, Oklahoma was the #1 incarcerator of women in the world, right? That's been since the 90s. And Oklahoma ran neck and neck for a while with Louisiana. But I did a lot, the past few years, Oklahoma has overtaken Louisiana and literally is the #1 incarcerator in the world. And so I think that when we're talking about fines and fees, it's not, we're talking about a lot of people being held in jails for a lot of nonviolent offenses. We're not talking about when people want to say, oh, well, you're letting criminals run loose and all of these different things that, people, the loaded language that people use to scare people. And because of that, then people then don't want to change rules and actually make things more fair and actually fund the court system. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about people literally who are poor, who are trying to make it every single day and merely are being jailed because they cannot afford to pay. And when they come out, they're also being charged every day that they're in jail, to Sarah's point, to Ed's points, every day they're in jail, they're actually charged a fee. So they're not just charged fines because of their crime. They're also charged fees to actually stay. You have stay costs when you are in jail. And if you are sick, you have costs for being in the sick ward. If you have diabetes, they charge you for your insulin. And so every single thing has a cost and all of that adds up. And that's very unfortunate. And honestly, the brunt of that is borne on the backs of the poorest people in Oklahoma.
Yeah.
Can I
Thank
say
you.
one more thing just real
Go
quick?
ahead. Go ahead.
I just want to chime in that pay to stay that you've got here. That ties into another issue that's probably beyond the scope of this panel, but with regard to the cash bail system, the challenge is here that imagine that you are charged in for pretrial detention. The judge says you can bond out on $5,000. Okay, well, if you can come up with $500, you can get out of jail. Well, let's say you don't have that. Well, then you're just going to sit in jail until you plea or whatnot. And it's kind of an incentive to plea because of the perverse incentives we have here. And our speedy trial statute is not very speedy. So you can wind up sitting in jail for months, being charged $42, $50 a day, something like that. Okay, great. Well, if you stay in jail, then that's going to be for 10 days. That's 10 days in jail at $50. Okay, you're up to $500. What if you stay in jail for 100 days? Okay, well now, if you had $500, you could have gotten out of jail. Because you didn't and you stayed in jail for 100 days, now we're going to add $5,000 to your fines. So because you were too poor to get out, now you also have to pay more money. Again, just one of the perverse things we see with our system.
Yeah, thank you. Tiana, I want to ask you the next question. So I know that you have some exciting work that's going on right now. David mentioned the additional harms that are happening as a result of this system. Can you speak to what you're seeing in your organization and what you all are doing about it?
Sure. So we've primarily been working in Oklahoma and Arkansas around fines and fees. We brought a case in Oklahoma. There's one in Washington County, and my team recently just brought a case it's in Oklahoma, but it's in Oklahoma City, but it's in Valley Brook. It actually deals with the town of Valley Brook, which is literally this little tiny municipality right outside of Oklahoma City. It only has about, at the last census count, before we filed the case, it had about 900 like 45 people. However, when you controlled for the amount of fines and fees that they collected, they actually collected more than any other municipality in the state of Oklahoma, including places like Oklahoma City, Tulsa, all of that. So you had this little small place that literally was just coming in and then just like taking people. I just called it, I was like, you're shaking them down. Like literally, that's what I used to say, because what the judge would do is you would get a ticket. And a lot of times the police would stop people for reasons that don't exist. Like they would say they had a broken tail light or they had a light out, and they never had a light out. They never had a broken tail light, but they would stop them, which would then lead to, oh, you're driving without a license or something's suspended or something is wrong. And instead of just letting them like go or letting someone come pick them up and, and saying, okay, someone needs to come get the car, instead it becomes a huge situation. And the police will say something like, well, if you give us $800, you can leave now. Well, how are you making this assessment? Where does the 800 come from? And how are these people supposed to pay this? And what we saw was the first time that they would appear in court, which normally would happen within a week, the judge would say, okay, here are your fines and fees. He would double some fines, We don't know why. And then he would say, okay, you owe $1,700 tonight. And most people they don't have access to $1,700 in one night. And they would say, okay, well, I need a payment plan. And he would give a long speech at the very beginning for about an hour and say, in 30 years, I've granted 15 payment plans. And so he would say things like that. So people would say, well, I need a payment plan. And he'd say, no, I'm not giving you, it's called a time pay. I'm not giving you a time pay application. And he would tell people, he'd say, step over here to the jury box and start calling someone who loves you. And you tell them that if they don't get down here with the money, you're going to jail tonight. People were begging because they had their kids. There was one woman who brought her baby with her because it's night court, 6 o'clock at night. And he told her, he said, I'm gonna let you go this one time, but don't bring your baby back here. Cause like, you're going to jail if you don't have the money. But people would say, I have to get home, my kids, like I have to pick them up, but you're still going to jail, and I think, so that's been some of the work that we've been doing, which is we're trying to make a difference, but it's also disheartening at the same time, because our case in Washington County, to talk about the juvenile fines and fees that David was talking about, we have a kid, well, she was a kid, she was 16 or 17 when she picked up that juvenile fine. And then because she turned 18 and couldn't pay for it, and there was a $50 or $75 warrant fee, because there's always a warrant fee, because there's a fee attached to it that then turns into $450 or $500 per warrant, she then ended up in this cycle of court debt and fines and fees, and she can't get out of it. And she was only 18 or 19 years old and ended up incarcerated over and over again. And so trying to help people and trying to just call attention to this, it's very frustrating, because I think the other part of it too is to the court's point, they're like, well, what are we supposed to do? Because we can't pay our staff. And, in certain cases, the judges are actually like incentivized to like deny the time pay applications, to deny them any type of community service. And so, we're doing work to try and hold people accountable. We tend to sue judges. In Arkansas, it doesn't work as well. In Oklahoma, it works a little bit better so far. We also, in Valley Brook, I said, we're taking the whole system down, because it was clear that everyone was in on it, including the mayor. I thought the mayor was the bailiff. I thought the mayor was someone who's supposed to keep the court safe. And instead, he was actually deciding who got time pay and who didn't. And so, or who was able to even see the judge and advising people how to plead. You can't do that. And so we sued the whole town. We sued the mayor, we sued the police station, we sued the judge, and we sued everybody in that courthouse. And so, that case is still working its way through. Washington County, we actually sued OIDS, which is that contract public defender system that Ed talks about. And, look, we get it. PDs have a hard job, and, we support the work of public defenders, and we understand that. But at the same time, it's really hard for you to fight for the court not to assess a fine and fee when you also get paid off that same fine that the court is assessing. So how do you make money, but you tell the court to waive or not get the fine, not to collect the fine from your client? So there's a conflict of interest there, arguably, and that we pled that's a big problem. And we sue the judges up there. So we're trying, but I think it's a partnership. To you all's point, I think when you're looking at change, and we're going to talk about this a little bit more later, you're looking at lobbying and working to get the laws changed. So you need the advocates who are advocating, who are actually out there talking about their lived experience, and who are actually talking and really just educating a lot of the legislators. You need that. It's good to litigate, but it can only get you so far. But you also need community education. People need to know their rights, because that knowledge is power. And I really think the community can fight back, and the community has a lot to say and a lot more power in these positions.
Thank you. Go ahead, Sarah.
Hey, sorry, Tiana. I mean, that's exactly, and just to add with the perverse incentives, right? District attorney's offices are approximately 50% funded by fines and fees from felonies, right? So you have the people who are making the charges. It's in their sole discretion on what to charge. Making these decisions when they get they have a financial incentive to push for whatever felony that they can. It's really a horrible system.
I want to follow up on the district attorney piece. I'm going to be sympathetic for one moment to district attorneys. And that is, imagine that you are a district attorney's office and you say, well, I can only prosecute 5 out of every 10 murderers this year. I can only prosecute 5 out of every 10 rapists this year. You prosecute someone who did commit a murder, and they wind up in prison for the rest of their life. They're not going to pay the fines and fees for that prosecution, right? Like, it has to come from somewhere. And again, DAs can't just decide, well, I'm not going to prosecute 5 of those. I better do a bunch of DUIs, a bunch of bogus checks, a bunch of low-level stuff, so that I get some fines and fees into my office, so that I can go ahead and afford to prosecute these violent crimes. So again, it's one of these things that having the system set up this way leads to a lot of these prosecutions and these additional fines on very, very low-level offenses. That's why the system is the way it is.
Thank you for bringing in that other perspective. And Tiana, you mentioned someone with, sharing their story. People need to share their story and educate. And so I'm going to turn it over to Demita. Demita has to leave early. She so graciously came on this panel for us just for this time. But Demita, will you mind sharing your story, how you became incarcerated and what it's been like for you since exiting the system to live under the burden of fines and fees?
Oh, I sure can. It's been very, very tough for me as far as the fines and fees, the probationary fees, just everything that is attached to the conviction. I was incarcerated for 21 years. I've just been out almost 3 years now. And I received, you say it's a minimum, but I received a large fine of close to $250,000 for my fines and fees. Even though I was incarcerated, they were supposed to be taking like 10% out. They claimed that they did, but once I got out, I still had to pay. And they had been taken out for 21 years. So I was still trying to figure out where that money went, which they have no record of it. Matter of fact, they say that I never paid anything on it, which I know for a fact because it was being taken out of my gang pay, which I wasn't making nothing but $10 a month, but it was being taken out of there. They take 10% of your $10 a month. So I went through all that, so I'm still confused on where that money is. But anyway, to make a long story short, you have to, once you get out of prison, and yeah, you may go and see the judge. Some will say, okay, we'll make it $25 or $50 a month. Some just gonna be like, nope, I'm not doing it. They don't care if you don't have a job. They don't care if you don't get a job in 6 months. They don't care if you get a job the next day. All they know is on this day, this need to be paid or you're going back to prison. And I think people with long sentences, they may get it the worst, like a life sentence or something like that, because they're basically like, well, you don't have a choice. You go back, you already been in there for a long time, so it don't matter to us. We don't have to change it for you. And I don't think that that should be attached to a conviction of a fine that large, or because I'm saying, what are you really saying? Why is it such a large fine just for drug trafficking? That never made sense to me. And you made one point about murderers getting time and they spend the rest of their lives in there, but they still got those on there as far as a fine. So where is the money going if they do spend the rest of their time in prison? What do you, I mean, you know what I'm saying? What is so beneficial about you attaching the fine? If you're not getting the money, then how is it really attached to you paying the district attorney's office? I mean, you know what I'm saying? Yes, you may do the low level ones, but they're hitting everybody. They're not missing anybody. They're hitting everybody. And if you just so happen to get a chance to get out, then you're going to owe them for the rest of your life. And guess what? I never want to go back. So I guess we tied like we married, because I'm going to pay mine. And no, I don't think that a lot of people can do what I do, because a lot of people, when you get out, that's the biggest stumbling block that you have. That not being able to pay your court costs and fines is worse than getting another conviction, because you get out here and think about it. We don't even have jobs when we get out. Nobody wants to give us a chance because we're felons. We don't have a place to live. We don't have transportation to get to work. But nobody cares about that. But that's why most people, you go to prison and you be like, what happened? Why you come back? I didn't pay my court costs and fine. And then they want to say, oh, well, that's because uh, that's the first thing you're supposed to do. Well, a lot of people just don't understand that. They don't understand how they're going to have to pay something if they don't have no money to pay it. So that's been a big stumbling block for me. But like I said, I had to dig down and pay so that I would never see that place again. And I just keep on paying. They'll put $100,000, $250,000 on you, and we poor. Most of us are poor, so we will be paying for how long? 50, 100, 4, 5. I'm just saying that is a lot of money. People don't even make that. Some people don't even make that in 5 years. How we gonna make it on minimum wage? Not no $9. Most of us come out here and work minimum wage. If it hadn't been for the pandemic, most places wouldn't even be paying you as much as they paying you right now. But most people just come out with that. So yes, it's very, very tough. And I hope that they do something to change it, because it needs to be changed. It needs to be regulated. And if you're going to have public defenders, if you're going to have district attorneys, you should already have a budget set up. And it shouldn't be based on paying them through beating other people down in their back. Beating people down, oh, you gonna pay this. That just don't make no sense to me. But that's my story. That's all I have for you today.
Thank you for sharing that, Demita.
You're welcome.
I mean, it's real, you know, like how much do you pay on a monthly basis?
Well, me personally,
Mhm.
because that's all I work for, and that's sad to say. Paying my court costs and fine, my probationary fees. So yes, I try to pay within $450 to $500 a month. That's what I said, but I take all my money to do just that. I don't have no in between. If I get a little money for gas money just to get to my job, then that's what it's gonna be. That's why I said, but I got a different drive than other people. I mean, you understand what I'm saying? Because most people be like, well, I'm just gonna pay $25. But to me, being incarcerated for 21 years, it just feel like I'm back in prison. I don't want to feel that.
Yeah.
I don't want to feel that at all.
Demita, didn't correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't you come out with around 250,000 in fees?
Yes,
Is that
yes,
right?
yes, what I said.
And then-
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I mean, and Demita, right, the majority, I think around 80% of women who are incarcerated have children. How are you supposed to take care of your children and pay that amount of fees?
I can't help mine at all. I barely can help myself.
Yeah,
And that's the honest to God truth. I can't help my kids. I can't help. The only way I'm helping them is to be here. But I mean, I barely can get to work some days. My money goes straight to my bills, my court costs, fines, and fees, which come first, and then gas. That's it. That's all I have room for.
Thank you. Kelly, did I see your hand up or?
Yeah, I wanted to ask Demita, what do you do for your job? What is it that you do since you've been out?
Well, it's been very hard to get a job due to the fact that I'm a felon. It's been hard to find a place to live due to the fact that I'm a felon. So I tried to find felon-friendly places. I found just like this janitorial place that I work at, and that's the only real job that I'll probably ever have. Due to
Thank
the fact that, I've been incarcerated. I mean, you just that is going to be on your back. I mean, literally, like when you go and do an application now, and I talked to a person, that had a apartment. And they was like, well, everything else checks out, but you've been incarcerated. I just can't. And I said, but I don't understand why you cannot. And they're like, we're a private place and we do not have to accept felons. And that's the truth. And then just like a job, when you ask them, they tell you to list it and then you get in trouble if you don't, because you're just trying to get a job, a better paying job so that you can survive. But you get punished just for saying you haven't been. But when you say that you have, you get punished. So it's just like a 50-50 thing. You ain't gonna win. You ain't gonna win if you say you have, and you ain't gonna win if you say you haven't. So, that's what I'm stuck with right now. Before that, I was working a minimum wage job. I was working at Sonic, and I was making $7.35 right there on Western. That's how much money I made. And then when this place came around, it's still, it was a little bit more. It's just like $10, but still, most people, you can't really make it on that. But you just have to try. But I'm saying, like I said, a lot of people don't have my heart, you know what I'm saying? But a lot of people ain't served as much time as I did to know that I never want to go back. So I'm going to sacrifice everything just so I don't go back. A lot of people are not like me. They're like, forget it. I just rather go back. And they go back because it's too hard out here for them to make it. They don't want to come from, did you hear what I said? I made $10 a month in prison. $10 a month. And then they took out 10% for fines and court costs. Okay, so now you imagine that. So when you come out here and you can't get no job, that's why people go back. At least I can make $10. And it's insane, but it's the truth. It's the truth.
Yeah. Demeter, you brought up a good point and showed us a perspective that, we haven't talked about, was that one, there's bias on one end for people that are coming out of the system. And so it's hard to find a job. So there's a struggle on that end. And then you have this hefty fine and fee on the other end. And it's just setting up hurdles and stumbling blocks and, not setting people up for success as they are exiting the system. I have a couple of questions. One, there has to be an alternative way to fund our courts, and I'd be interested in hearing what y'all have to say about that. But also, Sarah, can you talk to us about Senate Bill 951 and what is that designed to do? How will it
Yeah,
help us?
sure. And David, I think you guys are working on this one. So Senate Bill 951 will prevent officers from arresting anyone on a failure to pay warrant, which is what everyone's kind of touched on here. If a second warrant is issued, the court makes a determination whether failure to pay was willful and not a result of poverty or change in circumstances. So it means, officers are not basically collections agents. And so this is a good, this is a step in the right direction because as everyone has said, the courts routinely incarcerate people for failing to pay their court fines and fees without that determination. And additionally, with Senate Bill 951, a court may modify a payment plan, reduce the amount owed, or even waive payment if the defendant demonstrates that she is unable to pay. This bill is currently, it's my understanding, this bill is currently ready to go to the House for the House floor for third reading. So it's on its way, and we need to support that. But additionally, there's also legislation, I believe, that's going to be proposed in this next legislative session that will attempt to prevent fines and fees from being assessed on the very poor and allow waiving of fines and fees for people who have paid consistently for a certain period of time. I think it's 24 months. So that would be both two pieces of legislation that are in the right direction.
And I'll quickly point out too, Now, on the juvenile fines and fees, we can get that done, I think, this session. I think that, when we look at juvenile fines and fees, I hope we can all agree that I mean, it's shocking when you first hear that, when someone who's not familiar with fines and fees and knows that we are assessing these on children. And so I know that there's interest at the Capitol to get this done. And as I said before, one estimate was it would only cost the state about $500,000 a year to repeat. That's nothing when you're looking at a state budget, right? So again, if we can repeal that and then look back and say we will never do juvenile fines and fees again. So I just want to kind of a call to action on that we can get that done this session. It shouldn't be divisive or something like that. We can get that done.
Thank you. I want to open it up also to questions to our viewers. So I saw someone had their hand raised and then it went away. Before Demita leaves, if you all have any questions for Demita or any of our other guests on what we've shared so far, please put it into the chat. I see a hand. Okay, Courtney, I'm going to allow you to talk. How's that? Go ahead, Courtney.
Hello. I wanted to know how long was she locked? How long was she incarcerated for?
So, Demita, I think that's to you. How long were you incarcerated? Was it 20 years, 25 years? Go ahead.
21 years and 3 months.
21 years and 3 months.
Yes,
Okay,
ma'am.
thank you.
You're welcome.
But Demita, what was your sentence
Life without parole
for drugs?
Yes.
for drug trafficking. Yes, yes.
Yeah. Life without parole.
You said what?
I just wanted to make the point, life without parole for a drug offense.
Life without parole. Yes, ma'am. And I
Yeah.
wasn't even supposed to be out, but by the grace of God, honey, I got out of that place and I'm not going back.
I know, Demita.
Demita, if you're willing to share your story is really powerful. And it is actually one of the reasons why I really wanted to start, becoming a reform advocate. Do you mind sharing the front part of it?
Yes, I will. I had Blue Cross and Blue Shield insurance. My son became sick with a terminal imminent illness of Duchenne muscular dystrophy. And what happened was when I took him to the doctor, they determined that he did have it. And I started taking him to the doctor. Hold on. I'm here, I got it. I'm on my way. I said I got the car, I'm on my way. Yeah.
Demita's working while she's doing this, so.
Yeah, okay, so what happened was that once they determined that he did have it, I went to go and file on the insurance. When they found out that he had Duchenne's muscular dystrophy, they said that it was a pre-existing condition. So with that, they removed my son from my insurance policy. And once they did that, I could not afford his medical expenses. So I began selling drugs so I could take my son to the doctor. So that, because I was very illiterate to what Duchenne's muscular dystrophy was. When the doctor told me, hey, he is he's not even going to live to be a teenager. And it just did something to me. I don't know. I don't know how, if any of you have a child and you find out that they're terminally ill, I don't know how you would respond to it, but me, myself, I just couldn't believe I brought a child into the world to die before me. and it just did something to me. Like, but I was in denial. Like, I'm like, I don't know what that is. And something, you know how you just think, don't nobody in my family have it. So how in the world do my child have it? Nobody else in my family. We ain't never even heard Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. Nobody in my family even. I mean, you know what I'm saying? And a lot of people, if y'all don't know what Duchenne's muscular dystrophy is, I'll explain it to you. What that is girls are born with 2 X chromosomes. And if something is wrong with one of them, they have one to fall back on. Boys only have 1 X chromosome. And if there's something wrong with theirs, they don't have one to fall back on. So once that happens, it's in the X chromosome, turn it down. It's something called dystrophin. What dystrophin does is it gives the muscles food to grow. So if you don't have that food to grow, when the muscle grows, it just dies. The biggest muscle in the body is your heart. And so what that will do is, of course, everybody knows it will kill you. And that's what my child had. I'm not making no excuses for anything that I did, but me as a young parent, that's the only choice that I thought that I had. And
Anita,
yeah.
I have 3 kids and there is nothing I would not do to save my kids.
Exactly. And that's what I felt like I was doing for my child. I mean, I'm saying I'm a young Black mother. I mean, we're gonna keep it real. Black people have it hard. And I know a lot of people don't understand that, but it is absolutely the truth. Like, and there's nothing we can do about it because it's been ingrained for years and years. And though we fight and try, you still have those that still have that mentality that we're nothing. So of course, my son didn't get any of the help that he should have gotten. I mean, do you know how many, I was used to think, you know how many muscular dystrophy things that they have every year on TV? Oh, we'll help you, we'll help you. I couldn't get no help for him. None. And then they take you out for insurance, which you've been paying for years, and think, oh, you know what I'm saying? This is what we supposed to do. Then nobody explain a pre-existing condition. What? He was born without an X chromosome. I mean, how do you set up an insurance for that when you don't even have a clue what that is? So anyway, yes, I did what I could for my son, and my son passed while I was incarcerated. I did not get to see my son until I got out and went to his gravesite, which that's very hard for me, very tough for me. But you know, like I said, other than my mind frame, I made my son a promise that, I mean, you know, I would do nothing else to take myself back to a place that took me from him in the first place. You know what I'm saying? Just something like it's just very personal for me, but something that's very serious for me. And a lot of people are placed in situations that, you know, sometimes it's just no other way out but to do the wrong thing. And that's what happened to me. I did not have any other choice. Yes, I had a job, but me being a parent that I was, I'm like, it's just not enough. Like going to the doctors that I wanted him to go to. You know what I'm saying? I mean, they had to, you know, go into his blood. It's just different tests that you have to take when it's concerning muscular dystrophy. Just like my children, my daughters, it costs like $20,000 just for them to have a test to see if they are carriers. So, you know, it's just a lot.
Yeah. Go ahead, Demetra. Were you? Sorry.
Oh no, that's all I was gonna say. It just, you know, it's just very emotional for me when I talk about my son.
Absolutely. I wanted to note that, you know, first of all, you were given life without the possibility of parole.
Right.
And, you know, in the beginning, when you said it was drug trafficking, and Tiana, you talked about this, the loaded words, right? So people, I know in my mind, I'm trying to think, oh, drug trafficking, right? But we fail to see the person behind it, right? And then, you know, when people are standing in front of judges and courts, like they're not seeing the person behind it. And, you know, and I know it's, you know, don't have, can't excuse crime, but still there's like that, that seems excessive to me, life without the possibility of parole. And so I wanted to note that, because that was something that it always hits me in the heart when I hear your story, and exposes, you know, that this is not the justice system, that what we have is not what we want. Thank you so much for sharing, Demita. I'm going to let you
You're
go.
welcome.
I know you
Okay.
you had to leave, but we really appreciate you being here and sharing your story with us.
Oh, no problem. Anytime, anytime. If I can help any kind of way, you know I'm here.
All right, thank you.
All right, you all have a good evening.
Right. Well, I want to move on to our next topic. For our Langston students, please put your questions into the chat, and we'll get to them. I want to talk about expungements, which is, you know, another hurdle in the way of individuals rebuilding their lives and reentering society successfully. You know, is a stain of the criminal record in itself. And we talked a little bit about that. Demita mentioned that. You know, so you know, this can prevent individuals from getting jobs, from getting housing, etc. So one solution is an expungement. Ed, this is part of your expertise, and I know it's some for others too, so please chime in. But can you explain first to people who may not know, what is an expungement, why is it important, and who qualifies for it?
So expungement is something, it's a statute passed by the legislature a few years back that allows for the sealing of criminal records. Again, it doesn't fully erase it, but basically no one can see it anymore. Law enforcement can see it in some circumstances, but it also, this expungement statute also allows you to say that, hey, the crime or the events that led to the crime, they never happened. And it allows you to do that, and that's a creature of our state law. I want to clarify that that's something that is very state by state specific. If you have a federal conviction, for example, sorry, no expungement. That's something Congress would have to take up. But here in Oklahoma, if you're convicted in our state courts or municipal courts, you can potentially get an expungement. Who qualifies? That's a harder question to answer because it's a lot more technical, but I'll say in general, if you have less than 3 felony convictions and they're all not violent, and also I'm going to discount any crimes that would now count as misdemeanors. If you have less than 3 felony convictions, then the question is not if you can get an expungement, it's probably a question of when. In general, our expungement laws, if you have less than 3 felony convictions, you will eventually qualify for an expungement, provided certain other conditions are met. And again, provided you paid your fines. If you haven't paid your fines, that's going to be a barrier as well. So that's kind of who qualifies. But that being said, it is highly technical. You have to read the statute carefully. You have to read the criminal record carefully. And that's why, unfortunately, it's pretty hard to get an expungement without an attorney.
And how much do those cost?
So if you owe fines and fees, it's all of your fines and fees. So for Demita, an expungement is going to cost her $250,000 plus some. If you're just talking the expungement by itself, David had some good numbers in his presentation earlier. I will tell you, in general, the total just raw cost for the filing fees, as well as for the State Bureau of Investigation to process your expungement, those by themselves are probably in the $300 to $320 range. If you have the unfortunate circumstance where you were arrested by the city of Oklahoma City, they're going to charge you $150 to expunge their records. I have a question whether they can do that, because an expungement is a court order. Can they really refuse to honor a court order before you pay their fees? So that's, again, you're looking at a bare minimum $320 to $470 just in raw costs that the courts are going to charge. To get the attorney, expungement attorneys are probably going to quote $1,500, $2,000. It's not necessarily because that's how much it time they're going to put into it. But I will tell you, many expungement attorneys that kind of specialize in it, they might not charge you if you don't qualify. They might do the free work of the review to figure out if you qualify. And so unfortunately, if you do qualify, all that free time they invested in other people, they need to keep the lights on, pay themselves somehow. And so that's why, again, you're probably going to be looking at $1,500, $2,000. That's probably per county. If you have 5 misdemeanor convictions in Oklahoma County, you can kind of lump that into one expungement case. But if you have a misdemeanor conviction in Oklahoma County, Canadian County, Cleveland County, Pottawatomie County, Logan County, those each need to be their own expungement case. And so you might be looking at $1,500, $2,000 each.
Okay, so yeah, I think you might have just answered Jalen's question, was if you have 2 felonies and you get 1 expunged and you get another felony, does that count as 3?
I mean, again, it's one of these things where I hesitate to go ahead and talk about specifics right here, because I mean, for everyone, they can tell me they have 2 felony convictions. I'm going to want to look at your OSBI report. I'm going to want to see, hey, was one of them a simple possession charge from 2012 that now would be a misdemeanor? That's not a felony. I'm going to hesitate really to evaluate specific cases, because again, without looking at a record, I'm going to be wrong half the time.
Thanks, Ed. There's some more questions in the chat, and I'm going to get to those right after we finish this topic, so I'm not ignoring those questions. But we're on expungements right now, and then we'll go back to our previous discussion. So I want to ask about the clean slate legislation. What is that? And this could be David, Sarah, anyone wants to answer. What is the clean slate legislation? What's it intended to do? David, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. I can talk about it. So what clean slate laws do, or automatic expungement, is really they seek to automate the process of expungement that Ed was just talking about. And they do that using a computer tools. I'm not a tech person, I don't know, but it's using a computer and algorithms and data to make sure that that process is seamless. It streamlines that process, which in turn, it removes all of those massive barriers that Ed was just talking about. The current system is built to include. It also inherently simplifies the process. It reduces administrative costs for the courts and for the individuals who are eligible. But really what I like to think of with automatic expungement is it's at its essence, it's the idea that when we can, this clean slate legislation, it stands for ensuring that individuals are no longer denied those things like employment, housing, and education simply because they have a criminal record and they can't afford or go through the process of what they're allowed and eligible to do. One statistic I've seen is that less than 10% of people in Oklahoma who are eligible for expungement actually receive one. And the majority of people don't even know that they are eligible for expungement, or they can't pay for it, or they can't navigate the arcane system that we've created. So we know how the process works now as a massive barrier. But on the other hand, we know that there's a vital need out there, like I mentioned in that intro, is that you can look at those expungement fairs, for example, that went on last year or this year. People were lined up for hours to receive this, or to receive expungement, or even just resources towards expungement. So we know the needs there. I think that, to me, when I look at clean slate, which Oklahoma, by the way, and we will probably talk more about this, but we can, again, I keep saying we can get this done. We can get this done too in Oklahoma. We can be on the cutting edge and actually join the 21st century when it comes to expungements. There's no need for this process any longer. We know it works. Other states have done it. And I think we can, again, get it done in Oklahoma. So.
Yeah, and David, I think Pennsylvania just enacted clean slate legislation, right? Yeah, and it's kind of a no-brainer because the clean slate initiative will come in and it's no cost to taxpayers, no cost. So.
And that's the point too, is that there are national partners out there that are willing to work with states to not just push policy, but to actually build the infrastructure needed to make it work, to make the computer systems work and seamlessly work with clerks and with all of the stakeholders who are involved in that process. So that, we're in a unique position in Oklahoma now that this could be a reality. And I think another number I'd seen that this could affect over 100,000 Oklahomans who are eligible for expungement. Imagine if we can just wipe that away through a computer system and nobody has to worry about that process moving forward. So yeah.
So I was just going to chime in and say, I did some work on this about the decriminalization of marijuana, and I did a 50-state survey, and we really just looked at all the different states and whether or not expungement's available, whether or not you can only seal your record, whether you can do anything. And, it's really good that Oklahoma is moving towards this automatic expungement, because to David's point, how less than 10% who actually qualify in Oklahoma actually expunge their record. When you were looking like at a state like California, for example, you see those same numbers. So there's a lot that you see consistent across like certain states, even that might seem more dissimilar, right? Like Oklahoma versus California, but if they still have the same underlying problem when you have the barriers, because the issue when you're looking at it is the collateral consequences, right? And granted, my work and my research centered around marijuana, like the decriminalization of marijuana, and the fact that people are now making money off of things that primarily Black and brown communities were victimized for, and they can't receive education, they can't receive housing, they can't receive certain benefits. And that's what my work kind of focused around. But I think that like when we're looking at this as a whole, the benefit of that automated expungement is that more people have access, and once more people have access, then once again we see more participation, which is great for all communities, but primarily I would uplift like the Black and brown communities primarily.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. I want to ask one more question on this topic. How would broader access to expungements help the Oklahoma County and the workforce? I know we're hearing employers say, or we're hearing that there's a workforce shortage, the economy is suffering. So how would this help? I think I'm going to throw it to Sarah. Do you want it?
Sure, I'll take it. I mean, I think it's probably pretty clear that, the more employable people are, the gap. If we can get these records expunged, then it's less risky for employers to hire, and there's less bias in the hiring process.
And one point on that too is that we know, for example, that people who are justice involved have a higher unemployment rate, 5 times the unemployment rate, and that makes sense when you think about another stat of 9 out of 10 employers do a criminal background check when hiring. So you can see that barrier in real time to things like employment, which then leads to loss of housing, loss of education opportunities, those kind of things. And one point on expungement I want to make, I can't end this call or in this discussion without pointing out, Oklahoma has a unique opportunity for automatic expungement because of American Rescue Plan funds, for example, which was an incredible investment. If you're not sure what that, or ARPA for short, which was an incredible investment by the federal government into states, and those funds are meant to be used to rebuild communities and systems that were affected primarily by the pandemic, obviously. But those funds can be used here in Oklahoma to build and totally integrate an automatic expungement system. And again, that could affect 100,000 Oklahomans, and we won't have to pay for it out of tax dollars. So that's just, I just want to point out that when you're talking to, your legislators and they say to you, well, we can't afford something like that. We can afford something like that. That excuse doesn't work anymore. We have the money. We know that there's proof of concept in other states. I think Washington was able to allocate those funds toward an expungement system. So the time is now to make this work. And again, it's not going to be, hundreds of millions of dollars out of taxpayers. We can use those funds that are meant for things like this to really change whole systems in the criminal justice system. So I just wanted to point that out, because you hear often, especially in this state, you hear often, we can't afford it, or we're not going to raise taxes to pay for it. Well, again, that just doesn't work anymore. We can. So
yeah. And Tiana, go ahead.
No, I was also going to say, like, I also want to flag that everything has collateral. I think everything has unintended consequences at times. And so one of the things that I don't want to say criticism, but it's something to think about and to think through when it comes to automatic expungement is the fact that when you have folks who are seeking residency, permanent residency, a lot of their applications to seek permanent residency or permanent status in the United States, it doesn't matter if the courts no longer say like, oh, that's not a crime anymore. The application is very detailed and you have to provide proof of everything that you were like charged with anytime you've been arrested. And the problem sometimes is that they don't have access to that, right? So if it's automatically expunged and it just goes away, then there's no process for them to ever have access to, or their counsel, or even, USCIS, which is like the system that kind of like everything goes into to assess that. Then you end up in a situation where an unintended consequence could be that someone who's seeking permanent residency or permanent status is unable to access that merely because this great thing that benefited, to his point, it could be almost 100,000 Oklahomans, is something that could also, cause a burden on our brothers and sisters who are, like I said, seeking that. So just something to think about, not saying that it means we don't do it. It just means that you think through ways, you just go into it knowing that, hey, that's something that's there. And you can think about ways maybe to think through that and how to process and how to just deal with it when it arises.
Chiming in, following up on Tiana, I mean, again, that's a challenge that you've got is once I get an expungement for someone, I definitely warn them that it's like, you apply for a security clearance with the feds, you go ahead and you deal with immigration. Like, it is very clear in those, you have to disclose expunged convictions. And it's a warning that you need to be very cautious about when you are dealing with expungements. To follow up on another effect, though, of clean slate legislation and a reset here is I know that I don't have to, that if you're attending this, I probably know your viewpoint. But the fact is here that we have our criminal justice system has a disproportionate impact on communities of color, right? Automatic clean slate legislation, it's kind of a reset button for the law enforcement officer that goes ahead and pulls someone over and they go ahead and they pull up their information. If they're going ahead and seeing the prior drug trafficking crime or the multiple prior convictions, they're going to probably interact with that driver that they just pulled over for speeding in a very different way than if they see no record, okay? So we already have this problem that's been created by these disproportionate impacts, and an effect of this could be that when you are dealing with the problematic systems that we have that unfortunately we're probably going to continue to have for many, many years, it is a way of kind of resetting in some way those relationships. It by itself, it's not a solution, but it can be a piece of the solution there to go ahead and change it, to go ahead and take that very first bad impression that someone sees when they see trafficking and don't have the whole story, just take that away and let it be a relationship. Let it be a relationship with the current issue that they're dealing with.
I want to acknowledge a question from one of the students. So they're saying, I'm from California and they don't offer expungements. Are there any other options to get your record clean? I don't know if anyone's an expert on California or if there's other alternatives that we just.
So I was licensed in California. I'm inactive now, so I can't give you legal advice. But I can give you legal information, and that is that there is an expungement process in California. It's very different than Oklahoma's process. But at the same time, there are actually self-service forms, and there are a lot of legal aid clinics that go ahead and do help people fill out those forms. Sometimes you had to fill out affidavits and things like that. There's an expungement process in California. It's very different than here, but I'd do another look. I might check on the California Judicial Council's website. They publish the forms for that sort of process.
All right. Thank you, Ed, for answering that. I want to, kind of done with this topic and we're going to move on to probation. But before that, I want to address a couple questions. So one is, should justice not be blind? Should justice not be blind? Should not everyone who did the crime not be treated the same? And I think they're responding to my comment about Demita. And then there was a similar one like it. Why should anyone get less or more for a crime? Should it not be that all decisions be based on the evidence presented without outside influence of people's lifestyles or wealth, regardless above? Should everyone not be treated the same? And I agree with those questions that it should be. And in my response, it was more about, so your sentencing shouldn't be arbitrary. I don't think it should be arbitrary at all. But I think Oklahoma tends to lean on the side of excessive sentencing. So if, for instance, it may or may not be, but Demita's case, if this was a first time offense, I tend to believe that life without the possibility of parole was excessive. And maybe that shouldn't have been, but I'm not a judge. And so I'm going to throw it to our panel. What do y'all think? And do judges, first of all, have some kind of discretion in sentencing, like in any way? Like if someone's coming before them, can they give them more or less time? Or is it strict, like you have 25 years, you have life for this?
So I'm temporarily barred in Oklahoma for one case, so I can't talk about that part. I'll leave that to the Oklahoma lawyers, but I do want to touch on one thing you said about shouldn't things be blind and shouldn't things, and I understand that, and it should, but the reality is it isn't. And that doesn't mean that you don't consider the person that's standing behind you before you, because every person has a different story. And I think that matters. And when you're looking at sentencing, a lot of judges in general, there are factors that they consider, whether or not they have a prior record. What does that prior record look like? Whether or not they have kids. I mean, all of these different things, like their community ties, like, oh, they were beloved by their church or their mosque, whatever that is, all of that goes into it. But the problem and what we see in our criminal justice system is that usually when you're poor, but definitely when you're poor and you're a person of color, they don't tend to get the same benefit of the doubt and the same neutral treatment that you see people who are wealthy and people who are white get. And that is where it is very important that you call attention to stories like Demita. And I'm so thankful that she was willing to speak with us and that she's lending power to that movement, because it is important that people realize that what she was in jail for, that was excessive. And it's also important that we talk about in Oklahoma how the punishments, especially for women, tend to be very excessive when in terms of like their crime, and when you put them right up against a man, and that's regardless of race. So you can see it across the board for Black and brown communities, and you can see it across the board for white communities. You put them up against each other for the same crimes, and a lot of times you see the women, especially those who are mothers, you see them get harsher sentences. So what you're seeing the judges, all of us have biases, and you see people projecting and putting their own judgments on people, and unfortunately a lot of that comes down on women and mothers, primarily harsher than the rest of the community.
I just want to chime in specifically on fines and fees. If you assess equal fines and fees to everyone, you are absolutely not assessing equal fines and fees. Okay, if you go ahead and you assess a $250,000 fine to Demita, she is suffering a lot more than if it was Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk. They go ahead and they write a check and they move on with their life, versus Demita, absent some other relief, is going to be dealing with this for the rest of her life. She is being punished more harshly because of her financial position than someone else. And so when it comes to talking about what is equal, I want to make sure that you have to, especially on fines and fees, you have to factor in the person. Otherwise, you are absolutely giving unequal punishment to criminal defendants.
Equity.
Yeah, and Avita, I'd like to throw this out there too, because 90 to 95% of cases or convictions are through plea agreements, right? And so you have, and as Ed mentioned earlier, people sit in jail and wait for adjudication. Pre-trial, sit in jail for months and sometimes years. And so you know, a lot of the times, and, you know, to Tiana's point, I mean, if you're a mom and you have kids at home who may or may not be in a safe situation without you, you're going to take a plea deal just so you can get out and get home. And, you know, that's a really serious issue in and of itself.
Yeah, many of my clients that plea, I mean, unfortunately, I'm dealing with just the fines and fees, the conviction's long final, like there's nothing I can do about that. But you're absolutely right that one of the challenges, and DAs know this and they use this, if they want to prove you guilty of your original conviction, they need to prove that beyond a reasonable doubt. But if they go ahead and get you to plea and, hey, you can go home to your kids tonight on probation or whatnot, then it's like, great, I'll take that deal. And then you don't pay, or you get in some new trouble or something like that, they'll charge you with that new crime. But just you being charged and arrested on that is enough for them to revoke you on that old thing that you pled to. And guess what their burden is then? It's only preponderance of the evidence. They have to win by 50% plus one, okay, to prove that you did the new crime. So they want to put you on probation because they know it's going to be easier to lock you up down the road. Again, it just has to do with the perverse incentives that people will take those deals regardless of whether they're guilty or not because they want to go home.
Yeah, and just to piggyback off that, Ed, I mean, in Oklahoma, we have what's called a general enhancement. So if you have a prior or multiple priors, and a lot of time, you know, drug offenses, whatever. I mean, there are a lot of repeat for drug offenses because we know addiction, their relapse is a major part of addiction, and the majority of women are in for drug offenses. But you know, you can have a DA who will say, you know what, you've screwed up before, I can put you away for life. And so why don't you take 10 or 20 years? Which that's a major issue as well. So with that, I want to make a plug here. All of the district attorney offices or seats are open for reelection in 2022. So what you really need to do, because one major aspect, I mean, criminal justice reform needs to have a multifaceted approach, right? We need to focus on legislation, but additionally, we need to focus on our legislators and our district attorneys. And district attorneys have a hard job. And there are a lot of good district attorneys. And there are people who are in the job because they want to make a difference. And we need to make sure that we support those district attorneys and look for reform-minded and district attorneys who understand all circumstances. That's my.
Thanks, Sarah, for that plug. Tiana, did you want to say something? I saw you looking like, okay. All right, that was great. Thank you all for answering that. And there's a rich conversation going on. I hate to move on, but Ed, you mentioned probation, so I'm going to use that as our launching board off into this, you know, next part of the conversation. So I would venture to say that the majority of the Oklahoma public that's new to justice reform, or not even part of it, is unaware of any problems that have to do with probation. So like, please educate us. What issues are we seeing around probation and why is there even a need to reform it? And this can go to Ed or Sarah. Ed, if you want to take it.
Well, I'll start. I was touching on it originally. One of the challenges that you get with probation is that for individuals initially involved in the criminal justice system that are dealing with addiction, that are dealing with poverty, probation sets them up to fail. The fact is here that if you're on probation, you probably have to pay $40 a month just for that, in addition to your fines and fees. Oh, by the way, did we mention that when you have fines and fees and probation fees and things like that, you can easily be paying 3 different entities every month. And I will bet you that most of those entities will not tell you that you have to pay the other ones. And so you will wind up with individuals that are introduced into this very complicated system, that are dealing with addiction, that are dealing with poverty. And hey, by the way, if you don't deal with this complicated system, you're on probation. The DA can revoke you because they feel like it. And so one of the challenges that we have with probation here is that it is not like, while it is initially pitched as this alternative to incarceration, the system is not designed to help you succeed. It's designed to eventually get you back in jail or prison. So that's my broad strokes attack on probation.
Thank you. Well, David, I think I want to ask you about Senate Bill 336 and the financial benefits. Like, first of all, what is it? And how does it help us?
So sure, and I know OCJR is, from my understanding, this is the credits for supervision, right? So I know OCJR, that's one of their policy priorities. So Sarah or someone may want to jump in, but yeah, the idea behind this is that when people are put on to supervision, so probation, like Ed was just talking about, where they're out in the community serving their time, but they're under a huge amount of conditions. So, you can't fail a drug test, for example. It could be curfew. I've seen one condition where you can't ride in the passenger car or passenger seat of a car. So those kind of conditions that are included on supervision can make it incredibly difficult. Like, again, as Ed said, it sets you up for failure. So what this bill would do would be allow for individuals to earn credits off of their time on probation or off of supervision for being compliant with that supervision. So an example would be, say you're compliant for 30 days, then we'll take off 30 days of that sentence. And so you're being incentivized to stay compliant. But I think that even when we're looking at those earned credits or earned compliance credits, I think we could even expand that more and think about what other incentives can we offer individuals for being compliant that actually are going to affect their lives. That we can say, we are recognizing this success that you're having, instead of saying, here's a sanction and now we're going to send you back to prison, or you failed a drug test, so we're going to revoke you and throw you back in. Not, why did you fail that drug test? What can we do to help with that? It's, we're going to revoke you. Or again, on the failure to pay, we'll revoke you. So when I think of supervision, I just want to reimagine that. I want to think about how can we create a system of primarily incentives and also sanctions when needed and when necessary. But my opinion on revocation of that supervision, it should not occur for a technical violation. That should be left only for the most serious circumstances, whether that's public safety or maybe committing a new crime. Those should be reserved for those, or pulling someone out of the community and throwing them back in jail, which is what we do in these cases, should not happen for technical violations. That would be my first. I wish that we could change, but the credits, I think, would be a great first step to not only incentivize, but also it reduces the time that people are under those harsh conditions of that supervision. Like I said, those conditions that sometimes make no sense for somebody's life. So.
Yeah, David, just to piggyback on that, I was talking with a woman a few years ago. She was revoked, I think it was like a 20-year sentence because she was dating a felon or a former felon. I mean, getting revoked because of the person that she was dating. And it's just kind of like, well, at the rate we're going, the pool for non-felons is going to be pretty slim. But in addition, Senate Bill 336 is authored by Senator Paxton. And I think, you all correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's projected to save 3.17 million in the first 5 years if we can get it. I mean, that's savings. I got to tell you, in my time when I was an attorney at the House of Representatives, that's all I heard was, what's going to save tax dollars? How can we cut taxes? You know what? Allowing people to find employment easier, and in getting through just these stupid barriers. I mean, that saves money, and it saves families.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm going to give you the next question. So we've talked about Senate Bills 951, 336. We talked about the clean slate legislation. Are there any other policies people should support if they want to ease fine and fee burdens or make expungements easier for people to get who are maybe on parole?
Well, honestly, I'll throw it out to you all. I think you all are better experts on that. But I mean, there's so many, as I said, we have to, it's a multifaceted approach. We have to tackle, and all of these areas are so interrelated. I mean, if you really look at it, right, you have incarceration, education, child welfare, healthcare. All of those areas are so interrelated, but racial disparities, like data collection. I mean, one thing that and bail, one thing OCJR is taking a look at with respect to, we actually have a black box of information. We don't know really who is getting charged specifically for what, how much time they're spending in prison, how much are the fines and fees, how much is getting collected, who can pay, I mean, part of what we need to be making our policy decisions are the data. And so one thing OCJR is interested in is pushing to set up a system of data collection in one single location where we can get the court data, the district attorney data, OSBI data, and so we can really have a solid view instead of just saying, this someone saying this can't happen because crimes go up here if this policy is put into place, and or where we can really pinpoint how to make the effective policy decision. So with that, I'll throw that out to you all, because I feel like you guys have a great handle on all that.
I would just say one kind of warning about the legislative session coming up is the Reclassification Council, the Attorney General put out there for reclassifying all of our criminal laws. And so the current estimate by a nonpartisan independent group stated that under the new reclassification that's been proposed and will be possibly heard this session would actually increase incarceration by about 1,000 beds and lead to $80 million more in spending on incarceration. That's going backwards for all the gains that we've made over the last 5 years. So I guess, other than what we've talked about today, just, if you want to be active in this space, just keep an eye out for that and push your lawmakers that's not the way we want to go. That's not how we should be proceeding when it comes to reclassifying all of our criminal codes. So that's just kind of a warning, I would say.
Yeah, and David, I'd like to add that, I mean, in basically whatever savings that the reclass council was trying to rely on was to the 85% crimes, where if you all aren't familiar with it, 85% crimes are essentially crimes that are considered violent offenses, where the person has to serve 85% before they're eligible for parole or any type of release. So part of what the Reclassification Council did is they bumped some of those crimes down to 75%. Now, I will tell you again, in my time at the legislature and in the governor's office, every committee asks on any type of reform legislation, does this affect violent crimes? And if it does not pass. So what will happen essentially what will happen is that decrease from 85 to 75 or 50 or whatever will get cut out, and all of that will remain the same. So the increase in 1,000 beds, that will jump. I do know, just to let you all know, that the Senate is working on a version that actually could work, that would not require mandatory minimum percentages, which again, that's what the reclass proposal does, which is one of the big drivers of the bed addition. And so the Senate is actually working on a proposal that could make sense. So you all want to keep your eyes on that. But definitely, David, you're right. That reclass proposal makes no sense.
I want to follow up to explain something for those that may not deal with again, our incarceration system here is that why does 85%, like people get 5 years, they serve 5 years, right? Quite typically, when I'm looking, again, I'm dealing with fines and fees after people get out. In general, if you don't have an 85% crime and you generally don't break too many rules in prison, I see someone with a 5 or a 10-year sentence where they, on their judgment and sentence, it says you are supposed to go to prison for 5 or 10 years. I generally approximate that they probably did a quarter of that. Because typically, just in terms of the way the credits work in prison, like very often people would be getting credit for 135 days or 160, I think, per month. So, I mean, basically for every month you're in prison, you're getting credit for 4 or 5 months off of your sentence. So that's why those 85% crimes really matter, is that it's funny, we say we're tough on crime or whatnot, where it's like you get 5 years, you get 10 years, no, you get a year and a half or 2. And so it's just something to watch out for and be aware of when you're dealing with the incarceration system. And again, that's very selectively enforced, because if there's a CO that has it out for you and gives you a bunch of violations, oh, you're only going to get 30 days of credit for your 30 days in. So it can also lead to all sorts of other racial disparities and things like that that we see. With regards to watching out for legislation, just because of my position at Legal Aid, we can't really advocate on policy, but I will tell you one thing that I see with regards to legislation. There's a challenge between the enactment of legislation and the implementation of legislation. Back in 2016, for example, there was legislation that passed that required that anyone who is released from incarceration cannot be required to pay their fines and fees for 180 days after they're released. No one told the courts. And so it's definitely something where when legislation is passed, unless you walk into my office and say, hey, this court clerk says I have to get down there within 72 hours, what do they mean? I can file a motion and very quickly the judge will rule on it. But if you don't happen to walk into my office or another legal aid attorney's office or something like that, or you can't pay an attorney to say, hey, I'm still poor, give me my 180 days, the legislation means nothing. And so I just wanted to point out that when you are looking at legislation, there can often be a barrier between just the simple passage of it and the implementation on the ground.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that out, because I think a lot of people don't know that. I want to make sure that we get all the questions from our Langston students, because we're nearing the end. So if you have questions, raise your hand, or put it into the chat. Does anyone else want to chime in on this before we move to our last question for the evening? All right. Well, I want to hear any last words you all have for our students that are viewing, or our other viewers. What would you say to them? What do you want to leave with them? And we'll go one by one.
I'll start and go really quickly. What I would want to leave everyone with is get involved in this space with some advocacy group. We have power in numbers, but also, these are really heavy topics we're talking about. Sometimes I feel like we're not making any ground, but when you're around people who are working in it, it feels less daunting. So join an organization like OCJR or Together Oklahoma, which is a part of Oklahoma Policy Institute. Those kind of places where you can really push the needle, and work together on these topics. That's all I would say.
Go ahead, Ed.
Again, since I'm limited on the policy, I would just tell you Legal Aid's hiring. So it's one of these things where we are very fortunate in Oklahoma that we have one statewide legal aid organization, really. We also have the OILS, Oklahoma Indian Legal Services, and they do tremendous work as well. But Legal Aid, we've got about 130 attorneys across the state. Some of us work in this area, some of us work in housing, but it's all interconnected. We all work together, we can rely on each other, and we always have open positions for attorneys. So if this is something that you're interested in, we also have 3 great law schools here in the state where they have lots of clinics that are invested in doing the on-the-ground work. If you want to get down in the trenches and help real people, again, I would recommend considering law school and potentially joining me and all the other great attorneys we have here in a few years.
Thanks for the pitch. Okay, Tiana.
Sure. I would say continue to spread the word because, I continue to say like, knowledge is power. And I think that, a lot of people, myself included, didn't really know how dire the fines and fees situation was until I actually came in to do this work. And, that's only been 3 years. And so I just think that people knowing how bad it is, and also because then I feel like then folks want to learn a little bit more about their rights and what they can ask for in court and what they can do and or how they can help, and I think all that is so important because I always feel like, the work that we do, my goal is to shed light on the darkness. Cause I feel like when you don't shed light on those dark places, like it allows them to continue to operate however they want to. But the more that you shine a light on them, I feel like the more it makes them, it helps hold people accountable. And if that means people are going in court watching or people are going and sitting and letting these judges and letting courts know, hey, we're watching you. Hey, that helps too. And there's local orgs that do that. And so getting involved with your local organizations, finding them, and also just like, spreading the word that this is a problem and, learning more about your rights. I think that's an awesome opportunity to really help. And that would probably be some of the biggest takeaways I would say from this.
Deanna and Sarah, give you the last one.
Well, I'm going to +1 on each and every one of those because that's exactly right. And in addition to that, I would just say a simple thing, go register to vote. I saw this in 2016, especially during 780. It is depressing to see the lack of voters, and you really can make a difference. I know there have been points where I thought, what, my vote doesn't count, so forget it, but it does count and it makes a difference. And if we can all get together and especially you all as university students, because it's a really low percentage of people who come out to vote, and it's amazing, the difference you can make when you get out and you cast your ballot. Just, as Tiana was saying, educate yourselves on the issues and the stances and dig. Make up your mind, and then, exercise your leadership and go vote.
Thank you, Sarah. So I thought that was the last word, but then a question came through. So we'll let this be the last question, okay? Want to make sure we hit them all. So how could a person get a job in politics, like the big jobs like governor, because we really want to learn how to get the base jobs like attorney or lawyer rather than vice president or part of the cabinet or Supreme Court. So I think they're saying, how do we climb higher up that chain rather than, other jobs. I'd like to know how someone can get up there and also how to get elected for the electoral college and representative of state. So lofty goals here. Yes, so they don't know how to get to that. They aspire to great heights, but don't know how to get there. What is in a short response?
I could start that off because that's in my ship right there.
All right.
Getting your degree.
Yes.
I totally appreciate. I mean, I'm just looking at the participant numbers, and I'm so glad that my students show up tonight because I stand before them, every day on Zoom, face to face in my office, and I try to do what I can in my little part of world of Langston University, and I try to empower them to go out and ask the hard questions, seek advice, mentorship, and all of those things. And I appreciate all of you taking the time tonight specifically to speak with my students, even though I know this was a public forum, but allowing them to come in and see that, what I'm telling them to exercise their voice, to do the right thing, to get that education, because Langston's just a small stepping block in their foundation of what their life holds for them. But, in a sense, we've heard the adage, teach our future to grow. And that's what we're trying to do, at Langston University in my program, all the programs across the university. But, more importantly, those are high ambitions, but they're obtainable. And for a student to think that they can't be that person, I've encouraged them all to be the change that they want to see. And so, taking time and working with folks like you, volunteering, asking for internships and getting out there, if there's anything that these students can do, it is, get up and go help out and do things that they need to do.
Right, that was a good last word, Kelly. So yes, wise words from our entire panel. I echo everything that they say. I am going to close this discussion now, but please continue, and for our viewers, I'm talking to y'all, please continue to engage in these conversations, bring them up, talk about them with your friends and with your families, educate people, let them know what you heard, what you learned. You might shock them, like, what? I didn't know that was real. If you aren't registered to vote, register if you're old enough, and then go out, educate yourself on the issues, and vote for reform policies like the ones you heard today. As well, get involved. We have a lot of great organizations in this space. You have some of them here. Legal Aid is hiring, and and OCJR, we are always looking for volunteers. So hit me up, let me know, and you can follow us on all of our platforms. And if you want to connect with someone that was on this call, you have my information and I can connect you to them. Yeah, and so learn about the bill numbers, call your legislators, and make sure so that they can pass, pro-reform policies. All right. Thank you so much to all of our panelists. We really appreciate y'all being here. I love the conversation. I always learn something when we do this, but thank you for giving your expertise and your time, and it's so vitally needed. And once again, we just love that y'all are here. All right. Thank you so much. Bye.